This podcast is supported by Americans for Medical Progress through the Michael D. Hare Fellowship, which is awarded annually to support projects that inform and educate the public about the critical role of animal research in furthering medical progress. This fellowship honors the late Dr. Michael Hare, a renowned board-certified laboratory animal veterinarian who dedicated his career to scientific and medical advancements and who was deeply committed to animal welfare and advocacy. This is our 10th episode of Lab Rat Chat, and in this one, Danielle and I, that's right, Danielle's back for this episode, we're able to talk to Dr. Tara Martin from the University of Michigan, who heads up the Refinement and Enrichment Laboratory, and she talks to us about the importance of enrichment in laboratory animals. And for anyone who doesn't know what enrichment is or why it's used, she'll explain this to you in detail, as well as offer a ton of other great information that even seasoned experts working in this field, working with laboratory animals for a long time, will be able to benefit from. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this 10th episode of Lab Rat Chat. Welcome, everyone, to big episode number 10 of Lab Rat Chat. We've now doubled the amount of episodes we intended to do, and we have full intentions to just keep this thing rolling right along. So I'm also very happy to welcome back Danielle to this episode. So welcome, Danielle.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I just want to give a big shout out to all of the caregivers and moms out there who are working full-time jobs while entertaining toddlers all day. So keep up the hard work because it's not easy.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to make it back for this one. And you said you were also recording in a basement. Everyone knows, I think, from the video that I also record in a basement. So here we are. Lab Rat Chat is done solely recorded in basements.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So today's episode, we're happy to have Dr. Tara Martin from the Refinement and Enrichment Laboratory at the University of Michigan. And she will tell us all about what they're doing up there and also about what enrichment is for those who have no idea what I'm talking about and exactly why it's so important in the laboratory settings for these animals and for the science and everything like that. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Tara Martin. And if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, what made you interested in veterinary medicine and laboratory animal medicine, and just a little bit about the journey to get to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Tara Martin, as you said, and I work at the University of Michigan, where I direct our Refinement and Enrichment Advancements Laboratory. And for some background, I'm from Maryland originally, and I'm one of those people who always wanted to be a vet. Like, since I was a little kid, I always wanted to work with animals. I've always loved animals. I grew up on a small farm, and so I think that's where my kind of initial love of animals came from. We had it was just a small hobby farm, really, so we had some cattle and chickens and a lot of dogs and cats. We kept rabbits for a while when I was a kid. So just a lot of animal experience in my life. And I went to school studying biology with intent of getting into vet school. And I didn't get in the first time. And that's actually what pulled me into the direction of laboratory animal medicine. As many people know, vet school is very difficult to get accepted into, and you need a lot of experience. And they want hands-on experience in a lot of different areas of animal care. And so I was looking for things to do. I was a veterinary technician at the time, actually, and had worked in shelters previously while I was in college. And I just needed new experiences. So I went and did as much as I could. I volunteered at a horse sanctuary for a while. And then I saw a job posting to work with research animals and thought that would be pretty interesting. Before that, I had previously worked with some research animals. I had done fruit fly work as part of a college research project, which is very different because the regulations are so different from work with vertebrates or mammals. But I thought it would be a nice way to marry my experiences and interests of, kind of biological research and animal work. And I just loved it. I worked for Charles River Laboratories as part of their corporate response team, is what it was called at the time. So we kind of covered in-company openings, basically. If someone went on maternity leave or, was out on vacation, we would cover their position for a while, which let me work with a variety of animal species, ranging from rodents all the way up to primates all over the DC area. And from that, I just really developed an interest in research animals and research animal work in general. I liked that I could have a big impact on many animals and on human health. I liked the focus on humane and ethical care and use of animals and how thoughtful people were in this field. And so I went into vet school with this as an interest and got accepted into the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine in Blacksburg, Virginia, and kind of went from there.
Actually, I didn't even realize you guys both attended the same vet school. So that's cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, and we're not seeking out graduates of this program for this podcast. It just happens to be that we have now had two. So 20% now of our guests have been from Virginia, Maryland. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So, on this podcast, we've talked a lot about the 3 R's, one of them obviously being refinement. We haven't really talked a lot about enrichment. And with you and your team operating this incredible lab specifically to study these 2 things, maybe you could tell us about the Refinement and Enrichment Advancements Lab, kind of what they do, how it all got started, and the goals of the lab. And I guess basically touch on what enrichment is.
Yeah, of course. The Real Lab is basically just what it sounds like. We look at ways to refine experimental technique. And so some of the work that our members have done in the past are things like looking at the effects of pain control medication on tumor formation or on the progression of certain diseases to see if they really do affect those diseases. If they don't affect the studies, then we know that we can tell labs you can safely use certain pain control medication in your experiment without affecting your scientific results. So that's an example of a refinement. And then we also validate enrichment items. Enrichment items are things that we provide to animals to encourage what we call species typical behavior. So that would be to encourage a dog to act more like a dog or a pig to act more like a pig. If you sit in a cage all day, whether that's in your owner's home, in your crate, or in a large kennel in a research facility, you can get bored if you don't have interaction with other animals or a lot going on. The lives of our research animals tend to be very standardized for scientific reasons. And so to prevent that boredom, we often provide them with enrichment, and that can come in the form of sensory stimulation. So we may provide for some species things like music or sound, television. It could come in the form of toys, of positive human interaction. That's considered enrichment at our facility. So animals that enjoy that interaction, we would pet them or brush them. Or time with conspecifics. So we might have playtime. Maybe you have 2 dogs who don't get along well enough to eat together because they kind of get a bit snippy with each other, but they do great when they're just playing together. And so you schedule playtime for them to have time with each other. And the reason we research enrichment is because there are a lot of toys and items available that seem like they would be really fun to us as humans. And then you give them to an animal and the animal is like, I have no interest in this item. Or they may even be afraid of the item. So a common example, and you'll find this in the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals, is marbles, right? Marbles are used as a novel object test in mice because they see the shiny marble and they're like, oh, what is that? So they probably don't appreciate that as a toy. They might find it a bit startling or scary. Whereas something mice do appreciate is nesting material. And so we've done some work on nesting material and looking at what kinds of nesting material the animals seem to benefit most from, in what context, and how providing them with a big fluffy nest affects things like our ability to take good care of them. So if you have a mouse with a big fluffy nest and you look inside of the cage and it's hiding in there, are you going to miss things like whether the animal is sick or whether they're not doing so well after surgery? The answer based on our own research is no, but that's a question that's important to ask. So those are the kinds of studies we do. And as far as the history of the Real Lab goes, it was really founded by a colleague of mine, 2 colleagues of mine actually. Their names are Jean Nemzek and Jennifer Lofgren. Jean Nemzek is still at the University of Michigan. She's wonderful. She's very dedicated to humane animal care and use. And so is Jenny Lofgren, who has since moved on to Boehringer Ingelheim. And she's also really great, just very dedicated to pain control and enrichment studies. So they founded the Real Lab just as a place to really dedicate a lot of time and as much resource as we could to the specific studies that we wanted to do, which were things that directly benefit animal health.
Awesome. So you explained a little bit why animals need this enrichment in a laboratory setting because it prevents boredom and, provides stimulation to the animals. So can you just talk a little bit maybe about the benefit of enrichment gear in regards to a scientific study and how the enrichment benefits the study as well?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to clarify here is that the primary reason we give our animals enrichment or pain control or anything that benefits their lives is because it's just the right thing to do. We really feel strongly at Michigan and in our field as a whole that research animals matter inherently, that they should live lives that are interesting and comfortable. And so anytime we are able to, we provide them with fun things to do, with comfort and care and pain control whenever we can. But from a scientific standpoint, I think enrichment is also really important. And that's because if you are trying to use animals to model the complex lives of human beings or the complex lives of other animals who don't live in a research setting, then you really want them to have these interesting lives that encourage them to have good, healthy, normal brain development, to have good coping skills. Because we know that if animals grow up in a barren environment, they don't develop in the same ways as animals who might grow up, out in the world. A sheep who grows up out in a field, running around, avoiding coyotes or being caught and searching for the best places to graze is going to have a very different life experience than a sheep who might be born in a sterile or barren facility who never has much to do. And that bored animal is probably experiencing distress because boredom is distressing. We all know that. We pull out our phones or pull out something to fidget with if we are bored.
I think quarantine is...
Yeah, I've been plenty bored during this quarantine.
Yeah, that's a perfect example because I think people have definitely experienced the boredom from quarantine.
Yeah, exactly. And so we don't want our animals to experience that. But also, if you grow up in a really barren environment, it affects your brain development. And that might affect how you respond to things in studies, especially if you're studying behavior or neural development. And then another thing that it can affect is your coping skills, which means that an animal that does not, or a human for that matter, that has poor ability to cope with stressors can have a lot of downstream effects on things like the immune system, which can affect a lot of different study parameters. So those are some of the ways that I would say enrichment is important from a scientific standpoint. And then, of course, again, from the ethical standpoint, we just want these animals to have comfortable and interesting lives. None of our research animals asked to be research animals. We recognize that we are using these animals for work that often does not benefit them personally, but may benefit society and benefit other animals and humans as populations. And so because these animals are making this sacrifice, we really want them to have the very best lives they possibly can. So we try our best to provide them, again, with just the most comfortable and interesting and fun lives that we can.
So I guess a follow-up question to that, at the Real Lab, how do you guys measure the effects of enrichment, different devices, treats, like you were talking about TV and radio, on the different species? How do you know, if a Kong toy is a good option for a dog or a paper towel tube for a mouse? I know your website has that amazing database, and I was just kind of curious how you guys assess the effectiveness of these ideas you guys have.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's actually really hard to do stuff like that because you kind of have to try to put yourself in that animal's position and think, if I were a mouse, how would I feel? And of course, I can't really know that because I'll never be a mouse. My drivers, my evolutionary and biological drives are very different from a mouse's drives. My needs and wants are very different. But we really try our best. And one of the ways we do that is we use a lot of filming and development of ethograms. So an ethogram is basically a list of behaviors that an animal might normally engage in. And we look at what those behaviors might indicate, often based on previous research. There's a wealth of ethograms out there about some species. Dogs, for example, you can find whole books, especially from veterinary behaviorists, actually, who will tell you exactly what it means when a dog flicks their tail in a certain way or, shakes their head in a certain way. That's really great. For some species, we kind of are flying a little blind and we have to base it on our own observations of the animals. So we do a lot of setting up cameras and filming animals when no one else is around. We do know from just a wealth of research that animals, especially prey species such as mice, act very different when people are in the room versus when we're not. So I can give a toy to an animal and then walk in and see if they're using it, but they may stop using it as soon as I walk in, or they may start using it as soon as I walk in for any of a number of reasons. Maybe they feel really stressed out and just feel the need to chew on something. Some pigs will do things like that. Maybe they feel really stressed out and run away from the toy and hide from it. We sometimes do that with prey animals like sheep or rabbits. And so we'll set up these cameras and then we just film for hours and hours. And then our residents and our project lead, Sarah Thurston, who is just wonderful, and I spend a lot of time taking videos and scoring them just to see what behaviors are encouraged by providing this toy or item, and whether those behaviors are things that we can link to signs of stress or whether they seem comfortable. And we also look at context. So if I'm providing a resting surface for a dog, for example, that one's pretty easy. If I film the dog and they never rest on that surface and then they destroy it and it becomes, a dangerous object they could eat, I don't keep that item. But sometimes we get interesting things. Like we've been looking a lot at mats for pigs, which is a surprisingly hard question. What kind of mat can you give a pig in a research setting? Because we have really competing concerns there. Pigs are really big, powerful, strong animals. Something they really enjoy doing is taking things apart and rooting them up and destroying them, pawing at stuff. They're very destructive to the environment where they're out there as feral pigs, for example. But that's no big behavior. Yeah, so we kind of want to encourage that. But if we give them a mat to rest on, they tend to destroy them. And if we take a mat that's really big and heavy and they can't destroy, our staff can't pick up the mat and move the mat. So they can't clean under it. It becomes a huge ergonomic issue. And what we've found actually is when we provide pigs with mats that seem to hit that spot, they also spend a lot of time playing with the mat when we film them. If you walk into the room, they don't. But if you're filming them, they'll pick up the mat and root it and flip it all over the cage. And we did this short study with a vet student one summer where we filmed pigs with a bunch of different mats and then a bunch of different toys and scent items. And they ignored most of the items we put in, such as Kongs or balls. But the mats they would sleep on, and then they would spend a lot of time pushing them around the cage, probably because pigs just love to root items on the ground. And that's just such a normal behavior for them. So that's kind of how we analyze these for the most part.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you all really choose different types of enrichment? I mean, I guess you look at the different ethograms and their natural behaviors, like you said, for the pigs and the mats, but how do you choose different types of enrichment to study for an animal? Like who's out there deciding? I was looking through the database on your website, which I'm going to include a link to your guys' website. So anyone out there, if you want to go look at the database of all the different types of enrichment for the various species, you can easily find the link in our show notes that will go along with this episode. But who's deciding that a bubble machine, a popcorn maker or a fire hose, where some of the examples that I saw would be good ways to stimulate the animals in a research lab? Because I can guarantee you, Tara, that no one in our audience outside of working within this field would ever think that you would find bubbles and popcorn makers inside of a research laboratory.
I know we have a lot of fun stuff, so I'm glad you're sharing that. We actually have just a really great staff at the University of Michigan. We're very, very lucky. So we have an enrichment coordinator. Her name is Jenny Jones. And she comes up with a lot of the ideas and tests them. She just has a lot of experience in this field and working with wild animals as well. And she and our real project lead, Sarah Thurston, work together frequently to come up with ideas. They are two of the most common sources. Outside of that, we also have a group. We call it the Behavioral Welfare Group that meets every other month. And we talk about things like needs within our program. So if we feel we could really step up our enrichment for pigs, we'll all sit around and kind of brainstorm ideas. And as part of that, we have an open floor at the end of each meeting so that any staff member, any lab member or technician, even PIs, anybody who really wants to, can come and go, I have some really great ideas, and I think this is what we should do for enrichment. And then we evaluate those ideas. And we really look from top to bottom at any enrichment item that we might include. So first, the item has to be safe for the animals. If it's something that they're going to get stuck in or destroy or hurt themselves on, that's an automatic no. And that is just based on our experience as veterinarians and as animal caretakers. Second, we have to be able to sanitize or replace the item for non-sanitizable items. This is largely driven by health needs and regulations, which tell us how often we have to sanitize things, and also just by general husbandry desires to keep a clean facility. So we need to make sure that items can either go through cage wash or be autoclaved, depending on the animal that we're working with. If we have something severely immune compromised, it may not be able to get any item that's not completely sterilized. And so those items are going to differ. Or that the items are something that we can buy and repurchase. So something like a cardboard tube that animals might like to chew on and might get soiled, that would just be replaced. So we look at cleaning, and then we look at durability and cost. Of course, those have to factor in because, we have to be able to afford to buy items for all of our animals. We don't want to just give one fancy thing to one species, for example, and leave everyone else out. And then we kind of do our ethogram. So that's how we evaluate items. And then again, we just get ideas from our staff members and also from the literature. We organize an enrichment symposium every year at the University of Michigan. This would have been our 5th year, but COVID kind of canceled us for having that. And so we get ideas from that and from the group of speakers that we've had come to that. We frequently speak with people from other institutions to see what they're doing. And then we pull stuff from recent publications as well. There's really a lot more information coming out in publications such as JLAS or CompMed or technician publications through ALAS that we get a lot of good ideas from there.
So once you've, decided on a new idea and you go through the filming and the ethograms and you kind of get to the end, what is the final push to say, okay, this is an approved item, we should put it in our database, this was a success? I guess it's just a kind of overall approval of all those factors.
Yeah, basically. And some items will approve for special uses. We may have one item that all of our mice, for example, get. They're called EnviroPacks. They almost look like the material that a tea bag is made of. And they're stuffed with this crinkled brown paper, which studies have shown that mice are able, even strains of mice who don't nest very well, are able to build nice, complex, big, fluffy nests out of these crinkled paper materials. So we provide that to everyone. Every mouse gets that. But we may have certain mice that need special items. So some strains of mice are especially prone to grinding up food and chewing. And so they may need, depending on the reason that they're doing that, wooden blocks to chew. They may need different kinds of food items that encourage them to have, maybe more fat and protein in their diet. So they're less likely to chew their food and grind it up. Things like that. So we'll have some special items. Those items may be harder to access, harder to sanitize, or more expensive, frankly, that we might save aside for animals that really need them. But everybody gets some baseline level of enrichment that we feel is meeting their needs. And that's kind of how we make those decisions of what we will accept. Is we look at the whole evaluation I just talked about, and then we look at, does this meet a need in our program? If it does, if it's very similar, so there are Kong toys, for example, and then there are like Kong adjacent toys that look almost just like a Kong, but they're like squirrel shaped, but they're really just a Kong. We'll approve those, but we may not go out and buy them specifically because we don't feel they're providing any additional benefit to our animals. So that's really what we're looking at is, are we providing additional benefit to the animals that we don't already fulfill?
Is the specific type of enrichment that you're giving these animals based upon the type of study that they're on? So like if you take beagles, for example, if you're studying cancer or heart disease versus a more behavioral type study where you're looking at like depression or anxiety or something like that, would that impact the type of enrichment that you would use on the study?
Yes, that definitely has an effect. And so the way we determine that is our faculty of veterinarians at Michigan work very closely with the researchers that are in our areas. We all kind of have a different area we cover. And so we will talk with those researchers. Those researchers also will put in information to their IACUC protocol about any specific restrictions they might have to enrichment. And so we have those standard enrichment items that all animals get. But sometimes a researcher will come forward and say, maybe they're studying animals that grow up in a barren environment to replicate the experience of someone who's grown up with severe childhood neglect. If they're doing that, those animals might need to have certain things missing. So they may say, we don't want these animals to have this or that kind of enrichment. It really will affect our studies. We do make them justify that. Our IACUC will have them put in specific citations from the literature that show that this will affect their studies. If there's no information out there, they're working on something truly new and groundbreaking. Often what they'll have to do is do a small pilot study with the smallest number of animals possible to show that this really does affect my research. And if there is no effect, then we all go, okay, that's great. We can give enrichment or give our standard enrichment. But if there is an effect, then we allow them to have that exception. So that's usually when that comes up. Some other examples are if you are working on animals that might have had dental surgery, for example, perhaps you don't want them to have something hard and chewy for a while after surgery, just so that they don't damage their sutures, just like we would for dogs or cats who have teeth removed in the clinic. Animals that are, going to have trouble reaching or manipulating certain kinds of enrichment. So I wouldn't want to give an arthritic animal something that they have to climb because it just would seem kind of unfair and like something they couldn't utilize. We also have special kinds of enrichment that certain animals may get, so that arthritic animal may get an especially soft bed. We also work on an individual basis with our animals as much as possible. So our husbandry caretakers are in the room with those animals every day. And our vet techs and the rest of our vet team are in the room with those animals really frequently. And they're noticing things like these animals don't really seem to utilize, this group of rats doesn't ever chew on the nylobones when we give them. So can we give them something else? This strain, for whatever reason, really seems to value having a place to hide, or this particular dog doesn't like this kind of cookie or bone. So we listen to that feedback, and then we'll put up special procedure forms that say, this animal can or cannot have this kind of enrichment, or they must always have this kind of enrichment. We have certain animals who don't tolerate, just like your pet at home may not tolerate. I had a dog who couldn't eat greenies at all. He would get horrible diarrhea. So if we have a dog or cat like that in the labs facility, we would put up a sign that says this animal can't have this, put that in their record and note that, and then make sure that they have special food that will work for them.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love the level of detail and the thought and everything that goes into selecting the enrichment. And then especially for deciding if they can't have enrichment, the justification that has to occur for that. But out of all the different types of enrichment studies that you've done for the many different animal species that you've worked with, what has surprised you the most to provide entertainment and have a positive impact on an animal's well-being? And then likewise, what types of animals' toys have just you thought would be awesome and they just failed miserably and just couldn't be approved for use? And I have one example that we talked about. I don't know if you've ever tried it. So in episode number 4, we talked to Dr. Helen Diggs from ALAC International, and she mentioned something innovative that she had seen in a lab, and it was with rats, and they would put frozen peas in a water dish and let them go bobbing for peas, kind of like bobbing for apples. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at that.
I have not used that, but that sounds really fun.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Let's see. So I guess I can start with the second question first because it's really easy for me to answer. So something that failed spectacularly when we first tried it, that doesn't seem like it should be a fail, were jolly balls, actually. And if any of your listeners keep horses or work with horses, they might be familiar with jolly balls or even large dogs. They're like these big, kind of softish plastic balls that animals can like kick around a stall or carry around. And we ordered a bunch for our larger animals, thinking this would be really fun. And there's something that owners use all the time. And then they went through our cage wash, which of course no regular state send them through cage wash. So our staff is used to just sending things through cage wash. Nobody told them not to, so they did. And then they ended up with these like sad, deflated jolly balls.
Oh, that cage washer. It gets you every time.
Yeah, it was terrible. So now we since bought new jolly balls and we tell all of our staff, we have signs up in cage wash, like, don't put the jolly ball through. The jolly ball needs to be hand washed. So I don't know. That one was kind of funny. And then I guess some surprising things. We often have little surprises with this. Sheep enrichment is a particular passion of mine and a former colleague of mine named Portia Allen, because sheep really just want other sheep. That's like what they seem to love the most. They're a flock animal by nature. They want to be around other sheep, but there are some studies where they need to be separated from each other, either permanently or temporarily. And sometimes even just being through a kennel wall from another sheep, they're like, it's not close enough. I want to be near you. So we're really always looking for ways to make their lives the least stressful as possible and as calm as possible. And I was doing some reading in the literature about sheep, and one thing I came across is that sheep are really good at recognizing faces, which often surprises people. They're actually used as a model for facial recognition. And if you go look it up, there's this like BBC video where they have all these sheep like recognizing celebrities. They take this data from this researcher who like puts a picture of Barack Obama up there, and the sheep will like paw at the correct picture, and then they get a treat.
Whoa.
Yeah. So that's like something to keep in mind as you're working with sheep, is that if they seem happy when you walk in, it's because they're happy to see you. Like they probably do know who you are. And if they seem stressed out by you, you might think about like how noisy and scary you're being when you walk into the room.
Yeah, I'll remember that. Next time we have a sheep lab, I'm going to have to pay attention to that.
So they're used as a model for that. And they also remember flock mates really well. So something we're looking into is whether we can put up things like mirrors. Mirrors are a common enrichment item for large animals, or photographs, high resolution photographs of sheep faces to see if the sheep find some comfort in that. But while looking for sheep enrichment, and when we first started looking at that, I had a husbandry staff member who was just wonderful and cared a lot about the sheep she was taking care of and paid a lot of attention to them. And she was like, this is weird, but I think if I hang up some of the more like there were these dog toys that almost had these like little bumpy, bristly areas under them. She was like, I think some of my sheep would really like that. And she had this one sheep who every time we filmed her, she had this like little bumpy dog toy that she hung up on a chain, would like stand under it and just like nuzzle at it with her nose. So a lot of our sheep actually ignore those toys, but this particular one really liked them, which just goes to tell you that you really need to pay attention to the individual animal too as you're doing this, So that was a really fun find for that particular sheep because she really liked it.
I like that story. I didn't know sheep were so into each other. I mean, it makes sense, but it's kind of nice to hear those, detailed stories that you just shared. So one of my questions, so for all our listeners who work in this field, who do, help with the enrichment programs where they work, say they go to your website and look through the enrichment database and get some new ideas for their own program, such as using the whisks for rabbits or soft bowling pins for sheep. Is there anything that would be helpful to let them know about using these enrichment items? Do they just go on Amazon and buy a popcorn maker? Is there some guidance as far as, how to maximize the positive effects? They say for, your pet dog at home, rotating their toys and things like that, how often to use them. Is there some guidance for the people out there who work in this field that we could give?
Yeah, we definitely have some guidance. So We try to maintain a balance between good novelty that is fun and scary novelty that is stressful. Because like if someone was coming in and changing where you got your food from and where your bed was every day, you'd be like, why is this happening? This is really unnerving. And so we don't want to make our animals feel unnerved. So on the other hand, if all you had was the same environment all the time, you might feel really bored. So we try to look at this from a very species specific way, which is why all of our mice always is standard, always get the same nesting material. Everybody gets it. Everybody loves it. And if they need more, they might get a different kind of nesting material, even so that they can make even more complex nests. So whereas animals who really seem to value enrichment that is more diverse and a changing environment, such as primates or pigs, they get more rotation. And so we have a schedule for rotation. We try to have a couple of different items in our animals' cages at all times, and every week or so we rotate. We up that schedule if the animal is singly housed. So whenever possible at Michigan, we group house our animals if they are a species that likes to be group housed. And that includes our rabbits. We have a large rabbit colony and they are almost all group housed whenever they can be. And so what we'll kind of do is if an animal has to be singly housed, but they have other animals in the room, conspecifics that they can see and hear, they'll get a certain level of enrichment that's kind of a step up from our standard. If they are all alone in a room, say they're the only pig we have on campus, which we really try hard to avoid, but occasionally it happens, then we will up their enrichment even more. So we'll provide them with additional items. We'll rotate more frequently, but only some of the items. If we have 2 items, for example, we're rotating, each item stays for 2 weeks. So there's like an A-B schedule, like this item stays for 2 weeks and then it switches out next week. But the item that we gave them last week is still there, so they have the same items for 2 weeks so that they always have something familiar. So we try to maintain something familiar all the time. And then as far as analyzing items and making sure they're safe for you, I would say whenever you can to go through some of the large lab animal vendors. If they have a comparable item to something you can find on Amazon, I would buy from the large vendors such as BioServe just because they certify their products. You know exactly what is in them. If you call them and ask them any detailed question, they will respond back really quickly. And going on Amazon, often you'll end up with things that you perhaps didn't quite expect. Like we tried to buy jingly cat toy balls on Amazon once and got a bunch that just like fell apart. So some items you can really only find on Amazon. And then I would just kind of interrogate those, evaluate them closely, make sure they're not a danger. And then if you're repurposing items, especially for smaller animals, so if you have a breeding colony and you have baby rabbits or baby guinea pigs, make sure they can't get stuck in them. Rodents and rabbits like to nestle into small spaces. So if you're using whisks or wire balls, things like that, maybe don't give them to baby animals that could get stuck in them unless they have really close mesh that the animals can't get into. Those are some of the more common things, which is advice I would give to pet owners too, honestly, to anyone who has animals.
Yeah. All right, Tara. Well, so we've been asking this question a lot, or to all of our guests actually, about what they say to people when they're asked what they do for a living, whether you're on an airplane or at a party somewhere. And the question comes up, what do you do? So do you bring up the animal research component when you describe, your career? And if so, what are their reactions and how do you approach it and handle it professionally? And like I've said before, the reason we like this question is just everyone working in this field is going to get asked that question at some point and not always know how to answer it. So hearing from others in this field, how they approach it in a professional way that, speaks positively upon the field is always a good thing to talk about. So what do you say?
Yeah, so this is a topic that comes up a lot for us because we have a pretty big compassion awareness initiative at the University of Michigan. That's also run by Jennifer Jones and Sarah Thurston from the Real Lab. We talk about this frequently. And it's just a hard question to answer because you always worry a little bit about how people will respond when you say that you work with research animals. And when this has come up for me, I've had very positive experiences and also relatively negative experiences. But I will say that most of the time when people ask me what I do, I first just tell them I'm a veterinarian, and then they always, almost without fail, say large animals or small animals. And then some people who are familiar with the field, I'm always surprised by that. They'll go, oh, my niece works in that field, that's really interesting. Or, oh, I used to do research with mice. They usually don't ask many more questions. But occasionally I do get responses where people are curious or confused. And then I just kind of tell them a little about what I do, that I provide the day-to-day care for these animals, that these animals are so important to our society and to our field. And to me as an individual, that I find it really rewarding to be able to contribute to research that benefits all of us. Things like that. I try not to get too combative with people. I have noticed that sometimes people want to step out and get combative, especially if someone approaches you that way or very defensive. I personally don't find that very helpful. because anytime you make something into an argument, people sort of hunker down on their positions and aren't really willing to listen to what you have to say. So if someone tells me, for example, that they disagree with animal research, I tell them that that's okay, because it is okay. It's okay if they feel that the work I do is not appropriate or that they don't like our field. They can feel however they want. When I've had really negative responses, it's usually by people who are relatively ignorant to our field. I'm thinking once of speaking to someone for actually a business purpose. It was really unfortunate. Yes, it was me and a couple of technicians who were very sad. And I said, well, I hope you don't feel sickened because, our animals are really happy. We take really good care of them. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have about their care. So I think that's another big part of it, is trying to be transparent as much as possible. And it does mean sometimes acknowledging that animals may experience adverse conditions. An animal that we are studying cancer in will experience cancer, but that we do everything we can to alleviate that anytime an animal is going to be experiencing pain and distress that we know will happen, that has been heavily scientifically scrutinized. They're using the least amount of animals possible for the shortest period of time possible. And that's very rare. Most of our animals are just happy little mice hanging out in a cage, kind of tootling around and making their nests and enjoying themselves until they reach their lifespan, frankly. So that's the majority of our animals. I try to be clear with people and accept that some people might not appreciate what I do, and that's okay. We have a big world with a lot of diverse opinions, and overall, that's a good thing.
Tara, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I think that kind of wraps up most of what we wanted to talk about, but we wanted to open it up to you if you had anything extra that we maybe didn't touch on that you wanted to offer to our listeners, or if you feel like hopefully we've done the world of refinement and enrichment justice on this episode.
I guess I do think you've pretty much covered our whole world here. The one thing I do want to say is thank you to all of the lab animal workers who may be listening who are essential workers. I feel like there's been a lot of thanks going out to essential workers in many fields, grocery stores, medicine, and our field is kind of forgotten because we're not a very well-known field, but our staff are out there every day caring for these animals and risking their own health to get out to work and be with people, often in enclosed spaces, just because they love the animals they care for and they feel they should have the best lives possible. So I just want to put that out there, that I'm really thankful for all the staff who are out there making sure these animals have great lives every day.
Very true. Yes. Thank you to all the people who are working in the lab animal field right now as essential, because it absolutely is essential. And I certainly appreciate it. And I'm sure our listeners are happy to hear that also.
Yeah, I, of course, second or third that as well. We've said that on another episode also. I mean, especially just you hear about the coronavirus research going on in the news. And that's exactly really who they're talking about, is everyone working in this laboratory animal field with the animals and doing the research. So, but they just don't get mentioned specifically because you're not going to hear about the animal research component of it necessarily in the news. So yeah, thank you everybody out there. And again, thank you, Tara, for taking the time to speak with us today on Lab Rat Chat. We do have a couple housekeeping things I just want to bring up. The $100 Amazon gift cards, we had 5 of them. We have given all 5 of them away. So thank you for everybody that entered into the contest and for signing up for our newsletter and for leaving comments on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or when you can't leave comments there, wherever you can leave comments. Thank you for that. And keep sending your feedback via email at labratchat@gmail.com. You can message us and follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @thelabratchat. And just keep listening and supporting our show and telling everyone you know about it.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And again, thanks, Tara, for joining us today and telling us all this great information about refinement and especially enrichment. We really appreciate it.